Welcome to 10-Minute Texts, where ancient wisdom meets modern men and women. Each week, we'll explore a new Torah text from this week's portion, using Jewish sources from long ago and contemporary tools of textual and structural criticism. The goal? To find lessons for our own lives today from Judaism's deep well of knowledge and tradition. Hello, and welcome back to 10-Minute Texts. I'm Isaac Shalev. This week, Parshat Mishpatim, we're going to take a look at one of the most famous passages in the whole Torah, the famous verse of an eye for an eye. This is in Latin known as the lex talionis, the law of retribution, and it lies at the heart of certainly most Western judicial systems. I thought it would be interesting to take a look at where the rule is articulated. Where do we actually see this text in the Torah? And it's in this week's Parsha as part of a larger set of rules, a full legal code about basically civil law. In our current text, right, we see the verse, and it's actually connected to a larger story. The story is an odd one. You'd think we'd be telling a story about a man maybe throwing a rock and hitting somebody in the eye and therefore being punished an eye for an eye. But in fact, the story is different. The story is that two men get into a fight, and we're starting here with verse 22. Two men get into a fight and somehow hurt a pregnant woman, and her children come out. But no harm follows, no disaster occurs, and therefore the punishment is meted out according to what the husband of the woman evaluates, and that is then modified by the judges. Judges will then determine how much the actual damage is. The verses go on and say, but if any harm follows, then v'natata nefesh tachat nefesh, then you should give a life for a life, and goes on, ayin tachat ayin, an eye for an eye, shein tachat shein, etc. What a strange story. What a weird place for us to learn about the law of retribution. It's a little strange, but there's a few other strange things that are happening in this text, and I'd like to point them out. The first one is this veyatsu yeladeha, the departure of the children. The translation has, so her fruit depart. Yeladeha is quite clearly her children. So the first question we would ask is, why Yeladeh? Why the plural? Are we referring only to a woman pregnant with twins? And also this word veyatsu, they came out, right? It doesn't say venoldu, that they were born. Veyatsu is an odd word. What happened here? Is this a premature birth? Is this a miscarriage? It's not clear. Second one I want to point to is, who's getting punished? It's not so clear who's getting punished. And it's also weird that the punishment is based on what the woman's husband says. Like, the woman's husband has some right to declare what the punishment is, but then the judges determine it. Very, very strange. Now, that also leaves us with this other question, which is, what is this ason? Because we see two different cases presented to us in the text. We have v'lo yeh ason, if there is no ason, if there is no, as the text is translated here, there's no harm, or ve'im ason yeh, if there is a harm. Those are two separate cases that the text shows us. So what is ason? Now, it's a fairly common word in modern Hebrew. It means disaster or calamity. But, sometimes when you do close readings of text like we're doing today, and you pay close attention to words and to tenses, and are they plural, and are they in the present or in the future, and who are they referring to, sometimes you get lucky. You get really lucky to come across a word like ason. Why lucky? Because ason only occurs in one other context in the entire Torah. And that's a great clue for us to know that these two sections, this section about laws and this next one that I'm going to show you in a moment, are linked. they're meant to be read side by side. So let's take a look at that other. It's in Bereshit, it's in Genesis, and it's in the story of Yosef and his brothers. Specifically, we're up to the part where the brothers have returned from Egypt, having already met Joseph there, but not having yet known that it was Joseph. And Joseph sent them home and told them that they may not return unless they bring down their last brother, Benjamin. Now, Yaakov is not well pleased about that, and he says that he will not allow Benjamin to go down. So the verses here tell us, Yaakov says to his children, Oti shikaltem, you have bereaved me of my children. Shikaltem is from the same root as to be barren, to have no children. And he says, Yosef enenu, Joseph is no longer here. V'Shimon enenu, Shimon is still in prison in Egypt. Ve'et Binyamin tikachu, and now you're going to take Benjamin. Alai hayu chulana, all of these things are on my head. And Ruvain says, you can kill my 2 sons if I don't return Benjamin to you. You can punish me twice as hard if I don't return Benjamin to you. And his father responds, Yaakov responds and says, Vayomer lo yered b'ni imachem, my son will not go down with you, because his brother is dead, Yosef is dead, Vehu levado nishar, he's the only one left, he's the only one of the 2 sons of Rachel, the only of her 2 children remaining alive. Ukra'ahu ason baderech asher telchuva, and if an ason, if some kind of a harm should befall him in the way in which you go, v'horadatem et sevati be'agon she'ola, you will bring down my gray hairs with sorrow to the grave. So very, very strong expression of grief. And even the word Sheol is like, it's like the Jewish word for hell. I mean, it suggests damnation that Yaakov would be experiencing if Binyamin was to die, if Binyamin was to experience this ason. And all of a sudden, we're left in this really interesting place where the ason of a child emerging from the womb, from the previous text, is now connected to the idea of being left childless, of the extinguishing of Rachel's line. Rachel had 2 boys, Yosef and Binyamin, and Yaakov refers to their deaths as an ason. If the 2 of them were both to die, that would be an ason, and that would lead to Yaakov's damnation, that all of this is on Yaakov's head. Okay, so let's go back to our text, and let's take a look and see if we can piece our story together. V'chi natsu anashim. The men who are striving together are Yaakov and Lavan. V'nagfui shahara, the pregnant woman that they strike, is Rachel. Rachel, who stole Lavan's idols, and whom Yaakov inadvertently cursed, and said, the person who stole them will die. Ve'yatsu yeladeha. Why are we talking about a plural when it comes to the children? Because we're referring to Yosef and Binyamin. Yosef has already been born, but Binyamin is still in her womb. She's pregnant with Binyamin, and Binyamin will not be born until they arrive in the land of Canaan. V'lo yason. This is where the big question comes in. Will there be a disaster? Are Yosef and Binyamin, years and years and years later, in Yaakov's mind, are they actually dead? We know they're not, but Yaakov doesn't know they're not. And the punishment of Anoshia Anesh, this punishment of who will be fined, and it'll be according to the evaluation, according to the penalty laid upon by the husband of the woman, is filled with irony. Now it's Yaakov. Yaakov is the one who, through his curse, set the penalty. The penalty is death. V'natan biflilim, but he only needs to pay as the judges determine. And God determines that in fact Rachel can live long enough to give birth to Binyamin. And therefore there is no great ason. Yosef lives, Binyamin lives, Rachel is not bereft, she's not childless, she is not a meshakela. However, if there is a disaster, then your own life is forfeit. Going backwards to what Yaakov was saying to his son Reuven, to what Yaakov was saying to all his sons when they returned from Egypt, when he said, Alai hayukulana, all of this is on me, this is all on my head, and that I'm going to be damned if Binyamin also dies. This is what he's referring to. He's saying that his own soul will be called to account. V'natata nefesh tachat nafesh. And then we have the famous ayin tachat ayin, shein tachat shein, and so forth. So what we can understand from the way that these texts are put together is that we're meant, when reading this legal text, to recall the story of Yaakov and Yosef and Binyamin and all the brothers. And we're meant to recall it to teach us a critically important thing, which is this. Yaakov does not listen to Reuven when Reuven offers his 2 sons in payment. When Reuven says, you can kill my 2 sons if I don't bring back Binyamin. Reuven isn't offering double. He's offering 1 for 1. He's offering direct retribution. Yosef and Binyamin for Reuben's 2 sons. And Yaakov rejects it. Yaakov rejects the direct doctrine of retribution. Yaakov refuses to let Reuven take Binyamin with him. It's only when Yehuda approaches and says to Yaakov, if I don't bring Binyamin back to you, then I will have sinned before you forever. It will be an eternal sin for me. That's when Yaakov allows Yehuda to take Binyamin. Because Yaakov understands that there's some things that can't ever be fixed, that justice can't repair certain kinds of damage. Right? There's some things that if you lose them, they're never coming back. There's nothing that you can do about it. At the same time, though, if you take vengeance, you ruin any possibility for somebody to repair their character and to improve. And of course, that's what Yehuda did. Yehuda, who had been the ringleader in disposing of Yosef, in selling Yosef into slavery, repents, repairs himself and his character, and puts himself in the position where he tells Yosef, take me instead of Binyamin. Take me, punish me instead. I offer myself up instead. He learns selflessness and leadership. And that's only possible because vengeance is not the appropriate mode. It's not the only way to achieve justice. In fact, it's probably a terrible way to achieve justice. That's what these texts are all about. Now, I'll leave to the reader or the listener the following. There's one other allusion to a story in Genesis in this text, and I'll give you a hint. It's in the second half of this text, in the verses that we looked at less carefully, and I'll leave it to the audience to find that reference and see how it fits in to our story. But it is very, very much connected to this story, to the role of revenge and retaliation within a system of justice. Thanks again for listening to 10-Minute Texts. I hope to see you again next week. I'm Isaac Shalev. Shabbat Shalom.